This is genuinely insane. The fact that DK Metcalf could be on the move again after just 1 year into a massive deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers tells you everything you need to know, but the skill set in Washington would be perfect. What's up, everybody, and welcome into Commander's Digest. I'm your host, Carl McManus, and the rumor mills are once again swirling around DK Metcalf, possibly joining the Burgundy and Gold. Sam Vecchiano of Fox Sports writes down his NFL player each team should trade for during the NFL draft, and for Washington, it revolves around DK Metcalf, saying the idea that the Steelers trading him all depends on what happens with Aaron Rodgers and whether Pittsburgh goes all in for 2026 or goes into a rebuild. They did just trade for Michael Pittman from the Indianapolis Colts, so the cupboard wouldn't be bare without Metcalf, but he was a disappointment last season, just 59 catches for 850 yards and 6 touchdowns as Rodgers struggled finding him downfield. Vecchiano continues he'd have better luck with the younger, stronger Jayden Daniels throwing him the ball, and the Commanders are desperate for a wide receiver opposite Terry McLaurin. Metcalf cost the Steelers a second-round pick, but after a down year and with 3 years and more than $100 million left on his contract, something less would do. Cost, in Vecchiano's mind, 2026 third-round pick, 71st overall from the Commanders, and a 2027 fifth-rounder. So there are a lot of things that I want to break down here, but I'm going to first talk about all the positives and what DK Metcalf would mean for the Washington Commanders. Obviously, they already talked about the fit next to Terry McLaurin would be perfect. He would be the perfect wide receiver number 2. You see, he is rather up there in age. He's 28 years old, coming out of the same draft as Terry McLaurin, so he is slightly younger than Terry McLaurin. Also, higher draft pick, second round, 64th overall selection by the Pittsburgh Steelers back in 2019. He's got the size, he's got the height. He's one of the most muscular guys I've ever seen in the NFL. And you see, analytically speaking, he's never really had a bad year in the NFL. Now, statistically speaking, 850 yards, obviously not that bad, but for a guy that was acquired for a second-round pick, expected to be Pittsburgh's number 1 wide receiver, not all that great. You see the positional versatility, mostly used outside wide as a wide receiver, but then also in the slot a little bit, depending on some matchups. So again, Washington having him in that wide receiver room that has Terry McLaurin, we've talked about it a lot already. Treylon Burks currently sliding in as the number 2 wide receiver. I think Washington will look to upgrade this, whether through the draft, maybe not necessarily through trade, especially one that would be this costly considering Washington doesn't have a lot of draft capital to begin with. But again, we're going to break it down nonetheless, doing our due diligence. Van Jefferson sliding in at the slot, Luke McCaffrey and Jalen Lane, other possibilities there, still needing some development. Diami Brown, of course, we saw him have a outstanding showing in the 2024 playoffs, going off being Washington's leading wide receiver in that playoff run, but then taking the money to go to Jacksonville, taking $10 million to go to Jacksonville, having a down year there. Again, probably the 4th wide receiver there, behind Brian Thomas Jr., behind Jacoby Myers, once they acquired him, behind Parker Washington, maybe even behind Travis Hunter in terms of what their priorities were getting him the ball, at least when he was healthy. So DK Metcalf joining this room would make the Commanders' wide receiver room crazy good, especially with Jayden Daniels getting him the ball, especially with Chigo Okonkwo also added to that as a pass-catching tight end, not to mention Rachaad White out of the backfield as a very good pass-catching running back, and even Jeremy McNichols as a very good pass-catching running back. Wide receiver or receiver options for Jayden Daniels would be plenty with the acquisition of DK Metcalf. We mentioned his stats. Yes, not great in terms of DK Metcalf standards this past year, but all things considered, DK Metcalf, even with those 850 receiving yards, would have been first on the Commanders this past year. Remember, Deebo Samuel was the leading receiver with just over 700 receiving yards. He would have also ranked first in terms of receptions for all Commanders wide receivers. And you see, statistically speaking, for his career, very good. He's had multiple 1,000-yard seasons, and even when he doesn't reach 1,000 yards, going over 900 multiple times. So yes, a down year, but 850 yards for who's expected to be your wide receiver 2 in the scenario with Terry McLaurin on the other side. Very dynamic in my opinion. Adding DK Metcalf to a room that has Terry McLaurin, that has Treylon Burks as your possession wide receiver, and has some developing pieces in Diami Brown, who yes, still needs a little bit more development, Luke McCaffrey and Jalen Lane. But then, having DK Metcalf opposite of Terry McLaurin, who are defenses keying in on, because you have Terry McLaurin, one of the best deep ball trackers in the NFL, one of the best point of attack catchers, and then you have DK Metcalf, who bodies almost anybody. I've never really seen DK Metcalf get mossed. So having him on the other side, another weapon for Jayden Daniels to throw to is pretty scary for me. But as I mentioned, it's not all positives for DK Metcalf. We're going to first look at the contract for him. So as we mentioned, Pittsburgh only gave up a second-round pick for him, but then they gave him a massive 4-year, $132 million extension. That was tacked on to the year that he already had left under contract. So you see here, wouldn't be a free agent until 2030, and there's a lot of money that Washington would be on the hooks for if they made this deal. Again, a second-round pick to acquire him from Seattle is what Pittsburgh gave up. Washington, in this projection, gives up a third and a fifth-round pick, and then a lot of money that would still have to be paid to him. You see, yes, there is an out after 2026, but again, if you're giving up that draft capital for Adam Peters, you've already seen it, having to cut Marshawn Lattimore after just one full season, Deebo Samuel not looking likely to come back to Washington. You gave up draft capital for him. So if you're giving up draft capital for DK Metcalf, yes, a lot of money and then an out after 1 year, but you see an $18 million dead cap hit if they were to do that. But then if they don't, the cap hit skyrockets, $32 million in 2027, $34 million in 2028, and $41.5 million in 2029. So DK Metcalf would be a very, very expensive acquisition for the Washington Commanders. And like we said, 1 year, one down year with the Pittsburgh Steelers, yes, with an aging Aaron Rodgers, but 850 yards to me isn't necessarily a down year. If you call what Deebo Samuel did this past year a down year when he was the number one target, then sure, 850 yards for DK Metcalf is a down year. But, statistically speaking, analytically speaking, DK Metcalf is still at the top of his game. He's still relatively young. He'll only be 28 when Washington acquires him, 29 in December of the season. So it's not an age issue. It's really the price it would cost to acquire him in terms of the draft capital, and then of course having to pay him that much money. And then you get to the fact that he was also suspended at the end of the season for the Pittsburgh Steelers due to conduct detrimental to the team. If you don't remember punching that fan or taking a swipe at that fan, sure, you don't know what was said in that scenario. You don't know what the fan said to get DK Metcalf to react like that, but nonetheless, you kind of don't want that coming over here to Washington that's already building a very good culture. Now, of course, we wouldn't have to worry about that type of behavior happening at Northwest Stadium, but imagine putting DK Metcalf in Lincoln Financial Field with Eagles fans. How is he going to react to some of the things they say when heckling fans or heckling players on the field? How is he going to react to Cowboys fans at AT&T Stadium? So there are some things that I really like about DK Metcalf and what he would do as a pure skill set with the Washington Commanders, but then you add into that, what he's done in terms of that off the field issue, some other things that happened in Seattle, like illegal use of his helmet, taking it off and, swinging it at some players for some occasions. So I really like DK Metcalf as a player, but then you add into that the money that he's due, the slight off the field issues, the draft capital that it would take Washington to give up to acquire him, further depleting some of the draft capital that Adam Peters has already traded away. I really like DK Metcalf as a player, but I'm not sure that this would be the right move in terms of trading for a guy like this. Go out and draft the player. Again, Terry McLaurin was a third-round pick. DK Metcalf was a second-round pick. Acquire more draft assets and then actually take the player yourself, develop him, and Adam Peters can actually realize his plan of building the draft all along. That's all I have for today's video. Let me know what you think on DK Metcalf possibly coming to the burgundy and gold down in the comments. Something that Commanders fans, we've talked about it last season. We're talking about it again this year. DK Metcalf to the burgundy and gold. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and we'll see you later.